Welcome back to the Political Pulse 2.0. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most critical reports in American history, the Kerner Commission Report. It's a document that was intended to address the root causes of urban violence in America back in 1967, particularly in the urban Black community. And what's truly chilling is how eerily similar those issues feel today. The report made it clear: poverty and institutional racism drove inner-city violence, and political leaders ignored the root causes over and over again to our detriment even today. The Kerner Report, a presidentially appointed commission, was groundbreaking in its honesty. It bluntly stated that racist politicians and policies created the conditions for inner-city violence. It listed the factors: bad policing practices, a flawed justice system, poor credit policies, inadequate housing, high unemployment, and voter suppression, all leading to unrest. The commission concluded that white institutions created and maintained these conditions, and that white society largely condoned them. Now, here we are decades later, and many of these issues still plague American society. The Kerner Commission warned us that America was on the verge of fracturing into two unequal societies, one Black, one white. They gave recommendations to fix it, but those recommendations were buried by the Nixon administration and replaced by policies of benign neglect. More to come on benign neglect, what that meant, and how it's surfacing today in later videos. What we're seeing today, inequality, distrust in government, police brutality, is a haunting reminder of what happens when these issues are ignored. The irony is glaring. Politicians today still claim we need to study the issue of systemic racism and urban poverty. But the truth is, it's already been studied. The solutions are out there. In fact, the Kerner Report was one of the most comprehensive studies ever conducted on these issues. So, why the repeated calls to study it again? The answer is simple. It's a political dodge. It's easier for politicians to say, we need to study the problem, than to take meaningful action. Why? Because addressing the historical harms done to African American communities would anger a certain segment of the population, those who prefer to deny or minimize these harms. And when we don't confront the idea that there was purposeful legislation passed to very pointedly and specifically target the African American community, meanwhile allowing others to thrive for decades, is a grave mistake. Let's be clear. The embedded legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, and institutional racism has ravaged the African American community for centuries. The Kerner Report described how this historical harm impacts everything: the economy, housing, education, family structures. It spoke directly to the destruction of the Black family's ability to thrive in the world's most prosperous country. Despite the clear and present damage, why do so many people still pretend this isn't real? The Kerner Commission's findings were brutal in their truth. It said, and I quote, "White society is deeply implicated in the ghetto. White institutions created it, white institutions maintain it, and white society condones it." The Commission also warned that the United States was on the verge of splitting into two unequal societies, one Black and one white. Now, let's ask ourselves, does this sound familiar? Have we really moved beyond this? Fast forward to today. We're seeing growing discontent among Americans, both Black and white, who feel ignored by their political leaders. Economic inequality, the rise of populist movements, and ongoing racial disparities are fueling the same kind of frustration we saw in the 1960s. But here's the question: how long can this go on before history repeats itself? When politicians ignore the needs of the people for too long, it breeds instability. The report posited, we are splitting into two separate societies then. Are we splitting into two separate, unequal societies now being ignored by politicians in a benign neglect form that's no longer racially motivated but by class? What's terrifying is that the Kerner Commission stated these conditions lead directly to upheaval. When the poor and disenfranchised are ignored, the pressure builds. In 1967, every episode of urban violence was tied to the African American experience of being ignored by politicians. It's 2024. And it could be argued pressure is mounting today in all communities, not just African American ones. So, what do we call it when politicians repeatedly say we need to study this, when the answers have been there for over 50 years? It's a dodge, a tactic to avoid addressing the real, deep-rooted issues in our society. If we don't pay attention to the lessons of the Kerner Report, we risk repeating the same mistakes. What do you think? Are we heading toward a similar breakdown? Want a deeper dive into this? Do you know what benign neglect is? Want to hear more? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the Political Pulse 2.0 for more hard-hitting discussions.